Good evening, and welcome to Two Way Tonight, where anything can happen and usually does. Thank you for joining. I have a lot to go through. It's been kind of an incredible day here in my inbox, doing various bits of reporting, some of which I'm continuing to do as we speak. Grateful to you for making time in your day, evening, wherever you are, afternoon, perhaps morning if you're in Kuala Lumpur, for being part of the Two Way community. If you're here for the first time, welcome in. This is a little bit of a different place. We believe in peace, love, and understanding and the presumption of grace over hate and attacks. You wouldn't know it sometimes from the chat on YouTube or here on the Two Way platform, which is filled with pollution. It might as well be a regular social media platform, except most of us ignore it, and I recommend you do too. You'll excuse me while I appear distracted because I'm waiting to break some news, which hopefully I can do during this hour. And there's some news that's breaking in other fronts that we'll get to. If you're here on the YouTube platform or the Two Way platform and you'd like to ask a question, this is a wonderful opportunity to raise your hand and get in on the conversation. We love people who ask questions on a regular basis, but we also like new people. So if you're here and you've never raised your hand, had the courage or desire to raise your hand, please do. And we'd love to have you be part of it. All right. We'll get to some things here in whatever order we get to them in. We'll have a few guests join us, and again, we'll love your participation. So thank you. If I seem distracted, as I said, it's because I'm trying to break some news for you right here. Big story in the controversial five, as I call them. I can never remember all five. Let's give it a try. Matt Gaetz, Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, Kristi Noem, and Bobby Kennedy. Boom, named all five. Big stories on the controversial five today, largely focused on the gentleman from Florida, Matt Gaetz. What happened with Matt Gaetz today? Well, more specifics on the allegations made against him by two young women who claim he was involved in underage sex, not with either of them, but with someone else. They claim they saw it happen. Remember, this was all investigated by the Justice Department. They may have not found proof beyond a reasonable doubt to indict him, but they might have found things that would be considered by some senators disqualifying. The Ethics Committee, scheduled to meet Wednesday, in theory, to discuss whether they'll release their report into these same matters and additional matters. In addition, according to Axios, President Trump is personally sherpaing this nomination, calling senators to lobby them on behalf of his nomination for Matt Gaetz, which is weeks away from a confirmation hearing. Typically, presidents don't engage at this point, but the president is. Kevin Cramer, senator, Republican senator, has said on the record to Axios, Donald Trump called him. One other senator said he did. Interesting that that is going on. On the Treasury Secretary front, we talked this morning on the morning meeting. Bucket A, Lutnick and Bessent. Bucket B, a bunch of familiar names of Wall Street titans and Trump economic advisors. And then bucket C is the mystery bucket of new names. I believe that bucket B will have interviews. I believe there was one today in face-to-face with Donald Trump, one tomorrow, and one Wednesday scheduled, at least one per day. If my sources are right, it means he's probably not going to decide till Wednesday. Remember, he's looking to fill both the Treasury Secretary job and the job of National Economic Council chief. And I've been told, and this is part of what I'm trying to break here, one of two stories, there's some great and interesting names in bucket three, some household names of titans of things that may be under consideration for the particularly Treasury Secretary. Stay tuned for that. Martin O'Malley, former Democratic governor of Maryland, former mayor of Baltimore, current head until next week when his resignation becomes effective of the Social Security Administration. The only person besides Bernie Sanders with the courage and gumption to run against Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination in 2016, and a outstanding musician by some accounts. Martin O'Malley threw his proverbial hat into the proverbial ring to become chair of the Democratic Party. He did an interview with the New York Times about it. It is, I would say, with respect to the governor, who I like quite a bit, not his finest moment. It's a very evasive interview on all sorts of things. He basically says he's not going to talk about anything in the past. He's just forward-looking. Depending on who else runs, Martin O'Malley could win, I believe. He's a very attractive candidate in all sorts of ways. As Sean Spicer pointed out this morning, The RNC tends to elect members of the National Committee, past or present, to be the national chair from their ranks of about 170 people. The DNC membership, which is almost 500 people, often will choose outsiders, sometimes a chair and co-chair situation. So I think Martin O'Malley, depending on who else runs, has a good chance. Two other things. Number one, my friends Joe and Mika this morning on Morning Joe said they met with Donald Trump on Friday. Donald Trump, there was a counterfeit Truth Social post that he didn't write, casting negative light on the meeting. In fact, he did an interview with Fox News in which he spoke favorably about the meeting. Some of them, people at MSNBC, have reacted badly to this. Some people have said they're normalizing Donald Trump. Some might say that the majority of the Americans who voted for Donald Trump played an insidious role in helping to normalize him, perhaps more insidious than Joe and Mika. But I'll be curious to see what else gets said on MSNBC tonight and tomorrow and how their ratings do. But anyone who has a television show where the job is to talk about politics, if they have a relationship with the president-elect and the incoming president, probably a good idea to take advantage of that relationship for the good of everybody. So we can talk about that. I suspect some of you may want to ask me about it, maybe. Ann Seltzer, my longtime friend, my colleague when I worked at Bloomberg, outstanding pollster, was on this program several weeks ago talking about her Iowa poll. Lots can be said, and we'll talk about it. And if you want to talk about it tonight, we can, about Ann. And there's a lot of things on social media about her that are just false. Donald Trump went after her on social media today. I will say this. The New York Times, in a story about Joe and Mika, wrote about Ann as well. And they said in the story that Ann's poll predicted that Trump would win Iowa. I'll say again to you and to the New York Times, polls are not predictions. Reporting is not predictions. When people said that, when I reported that Joe Biden was planning to get out of the race by the weekend, people said, oh, good prediction. That's not a prediction. That's reporting. Ann's poll, like all polls, they're not predictions. The New York Times should know better. And I assume that reporter should maybe talk to the Times pollsters. Polls are not predictions. They're snapshots in time. And often, even by the best pollsters, they're wrong. So I'd urge everybody to lay off Ann. She's a very good pollster and a very good person. And I don't like one bit people saying false things about her. She doesn't like the fact that her poll was wrong, but great pollsters sometimes have bad polls. All right. If you'd like to get in the conversation, please raise your hand. We do have some folks joining us. They'll be joining us later. I'm still waiting to break some news, but in the meantime, we'll chat about whatever's on your mind. Before we do, I'll remind you, if you're in New York City tomorrow night, cue the graphic, opportunity to see this program live and in person. Sean Spicer, Dan Turrentine, and I will be in New York City at the vaunted Village Underground, part of the extraordinary comedy cellar empire that exists in the West Village, 130 West 3rd Street. You can buy your tickets now on twoway.tv. There are some tickets left, not a lot, but there are some. The VIP meet and greet at 4 p.m. or the regular seats 5 p.m. We look forward to seeing some of you there. It will be streamed, so you'll be able to watch it if you're not in the room. There'll be no opportunity to ask questions online, only in the room. And it'll be instead of this program. So there will be no 6 p.m. program tomorrow night. There'll only be the 5 p.m. Eastern time program. Again, if you're in New York City, we hope you'll come join us. All right, as we wait for our guests and we wait for my sources out of the corner of my eye to tell me the news I want to hear, let's go to your questions. As always, tell us where you are. If you'd like, we'd love to hear who you voted for president and what's on your mind. Matthew Pena, welcome in. Love the color of your sweatshirt. Would love to know what that is. If it's peach, I'm even happier. Unmute. Unmute. There you go.
Wow, I actually made it on the show. Cool.
Yeah. What's the color of that sweatshirt?
Yeah, pink. Montauk Brewing Company.
Montauk Brewing Company. All right. Welcome. Are you in Montauk right now?
No, I live in Stamford, Connecticut.
Stamford, Connecticut. And do you want to tell us who you voted for president?
I supported Donald Trump for president, but obviously our state goes blue. So,
does that honestly what?
Our state always goes blue, so it's not like.
Does that foot behind you belong to a child?
No, it's my girlfriend.
Okay. All right. All right. We like cute kids here. Welcome in. What's on your mind, sir?
Yeah, so I was wondering what your thoughts were on this, just like, so I feel like Trump's become a little bit more popular as far as culturally goes. I wanted to see what your thoughts were on like the media covering him as far as the Democrat media. Would they treat him a little bit more fairly? I know he coined the term fake news, and obviously a lot of stories that rolled out throughout the years kind of turned out to be in favor of Trump versus what the narrative was. So I wanted to see, do you think that this time around he'll get maybe a little bit more less
Yeah,
biased coverage or
great question, Matthew. I will say, and this wasn't the news I was trying to break, but Sean Duffy, Secretary of Transportation nominee, Sean Duffy, formerly of the Real World, I believe, former congressman from Wisconsin. Very nice guy. Also Fox Associated. So Matthew, what you've asked could be the subject of a doctoral dissertation, and I could talk about it for some time. I've mentioned here, and I think some people on this platform have agreed with me, the coverage since Donald Trump won has actually been less hostile. It's still extremely hostile, but the tone of it has been a little bit less hostile. Um, Although I just read something right before we came on that was extremely hostile about how his administration is bent on revenge and right-wing policies or something. Again, may be true, but a little bit more hostile than they cover Democrat. I think that um, all presidents get tough coverage, and all Republican presidents get particularly tough coverage. So I think the question is, will the coverage be tougher than that? And it should be tough for any president. Will it be tougher than that? Will it be tougher than George Bush's coverage? I think is probably the right question, because I don't think any Republican president expects coverage less tough than that. And I think the answer is probably not, but it will depend on his conduct. The White House press corps in particular, if they don't get the kind of daily briefings they want, I think they'll probably be more hostile, uh, just as they were with the Biden administration to some extent. So I hate to cop out, but I would say jury's out. I doubt it will be in the beginning as tough, but depending on how Donald Trump conducts himself, it could be every bit as tough and negative and in many cases unfair as before. I think it's too soon to say. But as I said, as of now, it's been surprisingly restrained in terms of its just out and out daily bias. And we'll have to see.
I agree.
Matthew, thank you for coming. How'd you find out about two-way?
You know, I was in the car with my mom and she had XM Sirius on and Megyn Kelly was on and you came on there and mentioned it, so I just checked it out and I always kind of follow all these different podcasts and news shows. I usually flip
That's
around.
awesome.
I discovered it and
That's
then
awesome.
I realized, oh, I could hop on the Zoom. I was like, this is pretty cool. So I've always been
All
trying to
right.
make.
Well, we're glad to have you here. Please come back regularly.
I might make it to New York tomorrow. We'll see what time I get out of work.
All right. We'd welcome you in. Sorry it's a little early for some people, but Sean has to be in bed by 8 o'clock. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, Matthew, thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Um, all right. I think one of our guests is here. Let's see. Um, I'm a bad speller. Oh, yeah. Here she is. Back with us, brilliant Sarah Bianchi, who knows
Uh-oh.
a lot about economics. Sarah, remind people who you've worked for in politics on the economics front, please.
Well, Joe Biden, Al Gore, Barack Obama.
Yeah, a lot of
Hard to
people.
hide. It's hard to hide my. A lot of people. Hard to hide my.
Yeah.
Hard to hide my.
Welcome,
Thank
welcome
you.
back. So I'd say we should run through all the Treasury Secretary candidates at this point, but the show's only an hour. So um, what about this Warsh character and this Rowan character? Do you know them?
Well, I know about Kevin Warsh, and I
Yeah,
could say I've been following this
yeah,
from the market perspective for a little bit
yeah,
now. I think the market would be totally happy to see somebody. I think the market is looking for someone that they think really understands deficits in the bond market and trade and all of these things, and they're hoping that they can play counter. Now, I don't know if they may be too optimistic on that, but I don't know the guy from Apollo. I don't really know
yeah.
anything about.
Okay. So
Uh,
Mr. Warsh has a lot of supporters. People like him. Seems like a very able guy, but he doesn't have a ton of management experience. Would the markets care about that? Or they
no,
just care about policy? They don't care. What about the senator from Tennessee, Haggerty? The markets have a view of him.
I don't know that they have a huge view there. I think they're kind of looking for the Minutia model, right? And really kind of also the I mean, Paulson, Geithner, they kind of all fit in a theme here. So that would certainly be something we haven't seen really since, I guess, '93 with Lloyd Benson. I don't think they'd be as excited about that, but
They
it's
want
possible.
somebody. They want somebody with. Would they prefer somebody with more government experience or more like Wall Street market experience?
They want someone who understands the markets.
Yeah.
And even the guy from Cantor, he's a trader, so it's not as sort of in depth a macro.
Right.
Kind of macro, understand the rate environment, understand what the Fed's solving for, all of those kinds of things is that's what they care about kind of for second, third, because they see all this stuff on the horizon with trade and immigration and that they that their analysis shows them is inflationary. And so they want to know that there's somebody there who shares that perspective and maybe can do something about it.
Yeah. What about Elon Musk endorsing Lutnick for the job? Is that something that would freak people out or encourage people?
I think everybody is a little bit struggling to figure out what the Musk role is today and what it will be in the future. It's not something Wall Street pays a lot. I mean, obviously, Elon Musk is a great innovator, but I'm not sure they are. It's kind of irrelevant. I mean, Wall Street knows the pedigree that it's looking for, and so, or the market investors do. So I just don't think that makes a difference. They're obviously wanting to see how impactful that is, because that's not their favorite choice.
Right.
At the end of the day, but they want to understand like how these relationships are going to play out. But I don't think like what Elon Musk does in business and what they're solving for are totally different.
What do you think of the supposition made by many or some that Donald Trump is going to inherit a pretty solid economy from Joe Biden, and he'll be able to take credit for things that really were based on the actions of the Democratic administration?
Well, that's life. I do think.
But is it but is it true that the economy?
Yeah. Well, I think the economy is in good shape, but I also think there's a lot of really cool investment that's going to come online through both the infrastructure bill as well as the Inflation Reduction Act and hopefully the CHIPS Act. And so there's a lot of ribbon cuttings in his future if he wants it. So, but yeah, I do think that we have had this soft landing and haven't had this recession that a lot of people predicted. So. Can't beat that.
Okay. You may want to pass on this one, and feel free. How's the Democratic donor community feeling about the election results? Are they in a mood to blame anybody or to find a 28 candidate? What's the kind of sense of people who supported Biden-Harris and Harris-Walz?
I think people are. I think they're. I don't think they're ready to go again. I think there's a bit of fatigue. They're asking a lot of questions. They want to understand where all the money went. They didn't like that the stories in the New York Times or whatever about these really expensive events. Kind of what did we miss? Why didn't we know? So I think they're much more in the mood to be reflective and kind of start from the bottom up rather than like jump on the next horse who they think might do this better.
And is there a consensus amongst the donors about why Kamala Harris lost?
No, I don't think they all
No.
agree. I think there's varying views on it was a macro backdrop. It was she wasn't a particular. Some people think she was a particularly good candidate.
Yeah.
Something she got in it too late. All the same reasons you read. I don't think anybody kind of knows. But look, I think it's helpful for the party that it was so decisive and clear because it's harder when you're like, oh, if only, you can't kind of say, oh, if only we had, put 3 more ads in one state or something. I think it's pretty clear to at least a lot of people that there were some fundamental issues.
Yeah. All right. I got 1 or 2 more questions for Sarah, and then go back to your questions again. If you want to ask questions about the economy, Sarah probably can't tell you whether you should refinance your home, but she can answer a lot of questions about the macro economy or its intersection with politics. And you can ask about anything you want, and we'll both be happy to answer them. And we may be joined by others. Um, so if you look at the history since the NEC was created, it's a relatively new position. I think it was created in the Clinton administration, right?
But yeah, Bob Rubin was the first NEC director.
Yeah. So the two primary policymakers on the economy tend to be the Treasury Secretary and the head of the NEC, and sometimes one of them is more powerful than the other. Sometimes they're very collegial. Sometimes they're rivals. If you were interviewing to be head of NEC for Donald Trump, what questions would you ask about how you might interact with the Treasury Secretary?
Would I ask myself or would I ask Donald Trump?
Would you say to Donald Trump, like he's courting you to be the head of the NEC? Would you say I'm in charge and the Treasury Secretary works for me, or I should be able to
No,
pick the Treasury Secretary?
no. I don't think it works like that. Honestly, I think the reality is that stuff. I mean, you can get whatever assurances that you want, but those things sort themselves out in the course of the job. You want to make sure you're in the room for all the economic decisions and that you are the coordinator. But honestly, sometimes it's really the Treasury Secretary, because they're not in the darn building, that needs to vie for relevance. I know that a lot of people don't think of it that way, investors in the markets, but proximity is a lot to do, a lot of power in Washington, and so
Is one
yeah.
of the is one of the two jobs intrinsically more powerful at this point, or it just depends on the two people and the president's attitude?
I think it depends on the two people and the president's attitude. I've seen it go back and forth. I think in this case, what they have to solve for, why NEC is so important, is at least as I think this is going to play out, they're going to have such a wide diversity of views on the international economics. I mean, and then they did last time too, everybody from Mnuchin to Lighthizer. I assume it looks like they're going to have that again. And so really the NEC person is important in terms of how do you sort this out and present to the president. I have not worked in an administration where the theory of the case on the economy is as wide ranging as somebody who hates tariffs and somebody who loves them. So I think that that puts the NEC person, or sometimes that's the deputy chief of staff and policy, who's ever going to kind of sort through these. I don't know if they're rivals, but they're super different perspectives, and they're going to have somebody again. I assume somebody like Lighthizer. I assume Lighthizer will be somewhere. Who really knows this president, really knows kind of how to solve for him. And so any of these Treasury secretaries that haven't worked with Trump, they're coming in with a bit of a disadvantage, just in that regard. Have you lived through Trump world? Have you survived it? I mean, it's every setting is different. And so I think the markets are way too optimistic that this Treasury Secretary or NEC director is gonna really kind of save them from what a lot of us on the agenda here.
I agree with you about the proximity. I think that particularly for a president like Trump, who's so ad hoc, if you're Treasury Secretary, you're in the next building over, but you might as well be a million miles away because you're not going to be popping in. And often you're going to be in the road, right? Treasury Secretaries at all these international conferences, testifying on the Hill, traveling domestically, whereas the head of the NEC is like right there all the time. So it seems to me that you'd have to be like a knucklehead as NEC head to be outfoxed by the Treasury Secretary, or if they're your total ally, even then you're right there. You could be at every meeting on the economy. Treasury Secretary just can't. Now maybe they can call in sometimes, but it's not the same. And particularly if, as you said, almost everybody under consideration for Treasury Secretary, there's a few exceptions, have not been through a Trump administration. Some of them have never served in the government. And so, as you know, it's not the same. In some ways, being Treasury Secretary, it's a beautiful office. Lots of famous people have been Treasury Secretary. In some ways, very powerful. You can do things you can't do in the private sector. But in some ways, less powerful than the private sector. Because if you're Jamie Dimon and you say student body right, everybody runs your play. You say student body right as Treasury Secretary, the head of the State Department or the head of the NEC may say, not our play.
There's some places where they just have a lot of the power, like debt issuance and financial regulation. There's some areas, but across the board, I agree with that. It's I also agree. As somebody who's been in and out of the private and public sector, they are different animals, and there's a learning curve for anybody. So new to government, new to Trump world. Wow.
Carol,
big
come on in. Thank you, Sarah. Stay with us. Carol, tell folks
Yeah.
where you are who don't know, and then nothing I like more than someone who says they've got a question about the national debt. So
Okay. You hear
welcome,
me?
Carol. Yes, ma'am. Hear you great.
Yeah. And I'm your couples therapist too, ex
Yeah.
officio. All right. So I still don't understand. I've heard I saw a guy in New York when we lived there that was saying the debt's not a big deal. We'll grow our way out of it. I don't know why people are fussing about it so much. And half part of my country, my family background is, people with common sense, cowboys. And so I hear that. I found Peter G. Peterson Foundation. I followed them for a while. They kind of keep saying, they said on 60 Minutes, like, we need to be worrying about this. Nobody's worrying about it. So I was just wondering if Sarah had an opinion about that, because I don't seem to be able to trust the economic people that go, oh, it's no big deal. That just doesn't feel like good horse sense. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense to me.
Well, I
Yeah.
agree with you. It is a really big deal, and we're at record levels right now, and we're about to be at more because this tax cut that Trump designed last time is going to expire at the end of next year, and really nobody wants to watch the middle class individual rates go up. So we are due for another 4 or 5 trillion. I do think we haven't really had a real fiscal conversation in Washington. I would say 2011, 2012, maybe Mark remembers, but at some point,
That was the last time.
yeah, at some point it's going to happen again. At some point, either the markets or all these people who buy this stuff from debt from us are going to tell us that enough is enough. And I do think the day's coming. I think that is kind of why, again, they're watching this Treasury Secretary pick quite closely. The markets are, they are worried. They're not worried enough to like really send huge shock signals to Washington at this point, but at some point it will come.
Sarah, what if, and this is a crazy theory, but what if Musk and Ramaswamy propose a bunch of savings at the Pentagon, but they say they won't make us less safe, changes to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid that they say will not affect current seniors, cut some domestic discretionary. What if they produce a big package like that and the president, who's no longer has to win the support of the voters, gets behind it? Could that happen?
It's possible. I'm not a big optimist about commissions generally, and it does seem like a lot of what they've talked about so far seems like they're kind of taking Social Security and Medicare off the table. I don't know if that will be where they end up. If they do that and they're focused on the fact that some general has too big a house in some part of the DOD, then they're not going to get very far from a deficit perspective. You can't do it. Well, I would argue you can't do it like without doing some revenue as well, but you certainly can't do it if you're not looking to look at healthcare, retirement, or defense, because the non-defense discretionary budget's just not that big.
Yeah, Carol, thank you. I agree, but that's why I think they might do it. And Trump might just be like, sounds awesome, get some credit. Victor, welcome in. Thank you for joining. You're unmuted. Tell us where you are, who you supported for president, and what's on your mind, please.
I'm in Northwest Florida, Pensacola. I voted for Donald Trump for president.
Yeah.
Basically,
is Matt Gaetz your congressman?
He is my congressman, but there's probably going to be 10 people jumping in to take his seat, and hopefully I'm helping one of them. He's a former SF guy. I think he's in Okaloosa, and he had an issue with COVID where he was let go. So that's kind of his foundation for the races.
Yeah.
Hey, pro-Trump, COVID. Anyways,
yeah.
that's enough of that.
Will Matt Gaetz, in your view, will Matt Gaetz make a great attorney general?
Man, that's a great question. I think he does exactly what. There's so many theories going along around here. I think the biggest one is that he was he resigned 2 days before the ethics report came out.
Yeah.
The idea is him not getting confirmed to run for governor in 2 years, and basically use the deep state or rhinos for not being able to get confirmed. I don't know if you've heard that.
Yeah. Oh, I've heard them all, Victor, including those. Victor, if you feel you're too on the spot, just ignore my question. But
Oh no.
when I asked you if you'd make a great attorney general, you didn't really answer. Will you
Oh,
make a
I'm
great attorney general?
okay. The only thing I worry about is okay. Obviously, you're aware that anyone that hasn't been in that type of position or
Yeah.
doesn't know the ins and outs. So basically, the people that work there can run around him. I guess does that make sense? Like kind of
Absolutely.
manipulate.
Absolutely.
That's the one
Absolutely.
thing I worry about.
Although manipulating Matt Gaetz is not an easy thing.
No,
He's a
no,
very,
no.
very sophisticated guy. Victor, your question, if it's about the economy, Sarah's going to answer it. If it's
Yeah,
about other
my
stuff, I'll give it my best.
my question on the economy is since 2016 I've been day trading and I believe the market is way overpriced right now. Trump is taking an economy that obviously unemployment is low. So my question to you is, do you see a huge correction coming in the next year? And if so, the way Trump looks at our economy is if the market's doing good, obviously in his theory, it's doing good like he did when he was
Yeah.
previously president. And so my question is, do you believe that there's going to be a huge correction? And what type of steps do you think Trump will do? Fire his treasury, or I guess what could he? Anyway, the biggest
Yeah.
question is, do you
Yeah.
think the market's going to
Correction.
correct?
Yeah. Victor, great question.
No,
Sarah, just so you know, I love the word frothy. So see if you can work that into your answer.
we actually think, I think actually the market, you know, some of the market's done well since the election. I think it was kind of holding back on uncertainty around that and the fights, and it gave a little bit back last week. I think it was a little nervous about some of these appointments, to be honest, and wondering who they were going to see at Treasury. But I am I'm still pretty bullish in general. I think there's an opportunity to kind of get sideways with things. Again, I think the immigration and the trade stuff are pretty real. But in general, no, I think we're pretty optimistic about that. I'm not looking for a major correction for right now.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right. Victor, what kind of trading do you do, Victor?
I do basically weekly options. I mainly trade tech stocks, Nvidia, QQQ, ETFs, things like that. That's the
Got
one
it.
thing I don't think people realize is these chips, a company like Nvidia holds a huge market share. It's the largest company right now owned, or as far as price. Anyways, that company comes out and they have a lower earnings. It's going to affect the entire market because they control such a huge amount of.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the chips, it's to me very overpriced. And if a correction happens while he's in office, I mean, he's going to be railing against those interest rates. He's going to be blaming everyone, but obviously his administration. So,
That's true. Victor, thank you for joining. How'd you find out about two-way?
well, I listened to you. You were the first one to break certain news, so I started following you, and then I looked up you on X, and I saw two-way, and so I started looking how to come in, talk, and share
Yeah.
questions. And today was the first day I was able to join.
Thank you for doing that. Have you recommended to your friends yet?
Oh, I will do that. I promise.
All right, Victor, thank you. Appreciate you joining. Cheap flights up from Florida if you want to come to the event tomorrow here in New York City. Just kidding. Probably too late for you. Bruce, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are. I know where you are, but tell folks who don't know. And you're a Trump supporter. And your question for Sarah, I hope you'll take the opportunity to ask her. Go ahead.
Well, I'm from the burgeoning MAGA hotbed center of Loudoun County, Virginia. I say that a bit with tongue in cheek, but it was really surprising how well Trump did in this latest election.
I was surprised as well. I'm from Arlington County, and I was really surprised when I saw your numbers come in.
Well, I did a lot of door knocking for Trump, my wife and I can tell you that the support for Trump was pretty across the board. I mean, not just working class people, but people who have fairly substantial incomes, and they were a lot of it had to do with inflation, the economy, not just the schools issue that was a big thing in the Youngkin win. But actually, what I wanted to ask about, and this was a big issue here in Loudoun County, which is the question of lawfare. I've talked about this before with Mark, which is why I think the Matt Gaetz appointment is a good one. And I also, since Mark, you've been trying to promote discussion between Democrats and Republicans, have some kind of mutual understanding. I actually think on the question of lawfare, this is something that Democrats, if they can just relax a little bit, should actually work with Republicans on. I was a former Democrat, and the issue of these prosecutors who have so much power, like Jack Smith and Ken Starr, for example, in the Clinton case, and or Andrew Weissman, the way he abused the power of the prosecutor using very novel and stretched legal theories to pierce the attorney-client privilege, to prosecute people around statutes like the way the Enron statute, I can't remember the name of it right now, was used to prosecute J6 defendants, and the Supreme Court said that was ridiculous. And
Bruce,
those kinds of
sorry, let me
anyway,
ask you.
my point is, I think people should really try and get together on trying to reform this justice system and prevent this kind of abuses from occurring.
Yeah, Bruce, as
which
a
I
Trump
think is
supporter,
needed.
as a Trump supporter, are you enthusiastic about Matt Gaetz being Attorney General?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I-
Explain as best you can as a former Democrat, in a good faith way. Why do you think some Democrats think that's a ludicrous choice? What do you think? What are they seizing on to say that?
Well, I don't think they like his aggressiveness in defense of Trump, but my understanding is that in the Congress, he was actually working with some Democrats on certain issues. And I don't know if many Democrats know that. I mean, from the media, you wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
But
So you think the Democrats or reservation about Matt Gaetz being Attorney General is that he's too aggressive or too critical of Democrats?
No, too aggressive in general, and they see him as a bomb thrower. And I think there's probably a little bit of nervousness. I don't know when you say Democrats. I mean, certainly people in the Washington Democratic establishment will be completely freaked out about him. I don't know if that's the case out in the country. I think that even a lot of Democrats are quite concerned about the abuses of the lawfare, because we talk about it in the Trump cases, which are big cases with people who have a lot of money. Trump had big defense lawyers and so forth. But this kind of stuff goes on with people who have absolutely no ability to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of fear out there about that. And people want to be protected from these prosecutors who have so much power and have used it in such a broad way that, and the other thing I think that gives me some encouragement about Matt Gaetz is the combination that Trump has come up with Todd Blanche as deputy, I guess Amo Above as number 3, and Sauer there as Solicitor General, who are all experienced former Justice Department officials. So you put that team together where you've got a guy at the top who will push the political focus, and with people who actually know the system, that we could actually get some very needed reforms in the Department of Justice to give people some confidence that the American legal system is fair.
Thank you, Bruce. Sarah, you want to weigh in on this?
No, not at
No.
all.
All right, Bruce, all I'd say is that there are a lot of Americans who think justice is run amok, and there are a lot of Democrats and independents who either voted for Donald Trump or were tempted to because of what was done to him by different prosecutors. And I hope that Donald Trump doesn't overcorrect. I hope he finds a way to lead a discussion and bring about reforms that don't advantage either side, but are in the spirit of justice. Bruce, thank you. Grateful to you. All right. As I've said before, I know as much about the rules of cricket as I do about crypto. So here comes Justin to ask Sarah a question, and I'll nod my head as if I understand. Justin, welcome
Hey,
in. Where are you calling from?
Thank you. Calling from Honolulu on my lunch break here. Mark, I actually met you back at a McCain-Palin rally in 2008. So nice to see you again.
Good to see you, Justin. I recommend the fish.
It's good. It's all
It's very
fresh.
good there. Yeah.
Yeah, my question is probably for Sarah. What do you think the future looks like in the United States? Are we going to actually be the leader that Trump talks about? Do you think there's going to be regulatory clarity? Those kinds of questions. I did have a follow-up for Mark, though. I was going to ask
Okay.
this.
Well, all right. Let's Sarah answer on crypto.
Okay.
And Sarah.
I think the Trump administration is going to take a really different direction here, a much more deregulatory than the Biden administration. I know there was a lot of concern about what many I think thought was overreach, particularly from the SEC. So I do think you're going to get some clarity here. Whether that ultimately means we'll be the leader, I'm not sure I'm informed enough to really know, but it will certainly be a more friendly environment. What we've told our clients is that really on small banks, M&A, crypto, these are places where I think regulatory clarity is gonna be helpful in the next administration.
Online communities talk a lot about Gary Gensler, getting him out of there. Do you think that actually plays a role or plays a factor? Would that be, helpful if he was gone, or will he be gone?
I don't really know. His term goes a little bit longer, but mostly people do step aside. So I don't actually really know. But certainly, he's a creative policymaker and has certainly tried to push an agenda here. So I think this is, especially when you get to some of these more independent agencies, I think the notion that personnel is policy is not. There's a lot of truth to that.
Thank
All
you
right,
so much.
Justin, I'm going to let you ask a question in a second. Sarah needs to go pretty soon. So Sarah, I'd love for you to just, before you go, thank you for spending time again with us. What are your big unanswered questions about personnel and policy in this administration right now? What are like the 2 or 3 things you think you and your community are wondering about?
Well, I certainly am watching where Bob Lighthizer ends up. That is trade, having worked in it, is very, very technical. It is, you can't just kind of come in as a new outsider and shake up trade. There's a lot of statutes. There's a lot of interaction with foreign partners. Lighthizer has a very, very strong theory of the case. And that I don't always agree with, but I certainly think everyone would agree that he's very savvy, understanding of the system and its levers. So my own view is how effective Trump is in this space is really an outcome of where he and some of the folks who work closely with him landed. So I'm really watching that one the closest. Again, I think like we talked about, the Treasury Secretary is going to have a tall order of figuring out all of these pieces at once. Don't envy that. Obviously, Mnuchin did a really good job at that, but that we're all new at that time. So I'm watching that. I do want to see who's at NSC. Commerce is more important now because all the export control stuff. But
why has there been so little discussion about OMB? And have you heard any names for OMB?
I have not heard any names. Your OMB can be a really, really powerful position, and particularly since we're going to have this whole fiscal debate. I think probably so many people are focused on, again, the overall composition of the economic agenda, whether it's the tariffs, immigration, the intersection with that, and tax. But I think it's also one of those ones where a lot of outside people don't actually always know how important that job is. It's very, very important. That person's going to be really, really busy. I've not heard any names. I don't know if you have, but
I have, and it's very strange. I've just started to focus on it. Sarah, again, so grateful to you. Please come back regularly.
Anytime.
Thanks. All right. Back to Justin. Aloha for your second question.
Thank you so much. This is a specific question with a larger question attached to it. Living on an island myself, there's all this talk about acquiring something like Greenland. Is that even a possibility? And then my broader question is, what do you think the biggest splashy thing that Trump will try to do, leaving a legacy in the next 4 years would be, if you had to guess?
I don't know about acquiring islands. I know it tempts him, but I don't know about that. I have no basis to answer. I'd say if I had to guess now, the biggest thing is to try to fix cities. I think he might try a big, like urban renewal type of thing with a lot of spending to fix stuff up, to fix up schools, to fix up roads, to fix up neighborhoods and parks, to try to leave those as like a legacy of his building capacity. That's my guess. Justin, thank you for joining. Very much
Thank you.
appreciate it. Love your town. All right, Mark. Is Mark gone? Mark's seat is empty. I want to call in an empty seat. Hold on. Justin, welcome in. Glad to have you here, sir. Remind people who don't know where you are.
Yeah, I'm in Maine,
Yes, sir.
located in the 2nd Congressional District.
Yes,
Used
sir.
to live in Northwest Florida, though, which, of course, was where Matt Gaetz is from.
Yes, sir.
It's really interesting. I just have a couple notes on Matt Gaetz that I'd love to point out.
Sure.
I really feel like he's probably the closest figure to Donald Trump in the Congress, in that he really doesn't care what everyone else thinks of him. And of course, that's one of his biggest downfalls. You know, as he kind of makes waves, he was the person to undermine McCarthy. He was constantly calling out all of the congressional people that are doing stock trading. You can see all kinds of internet articles and videos about that. But I would just encourage anyone that is unsure about who Matt Gaetz is. Of course, there's all the allegations, and we'll let that stand because that obviously needs to be addressed, and hopefully hopefully people can come out and really clarify all the details around that. I think Molly Hemingway wrote a really good article about that recently. But I guess what I would point out is, if you really want to know who Matt Gaetz is, go on YouTube, look up Tim Pool. He's done entire 2 hours of conversation about Matt Gaetz, and he really starts to educate you on what the Congress does and how the Congress is funded and how representatives run for re-election. And I think you'd walk away from that not very happy with how the legislative body goes about their business, because most of their time is really spent campaigning and trying to get money from lobbyists. And as someone who doesn't take money from lobbyists, you know, Gaetz is kind of almost on an island there, along with people like Ro Khanna and the other people in the Democrat Party as well.
That's excellent points. Thank you. You're an informed man. Do you have a question you want to ask?
I just really love the platform. I think you've done a tremendous job. I think all media should be like two-way. Hopefully it kind of trends that way, and less like Mika Brzezinski and Scarborough.
Who also have spent time in Maine. Justin, all I can say is I hope all media becomes better, but I hope two-way is two-way. Thank you for joining. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. All right, Mark, you're back. Let's bring Mark in. Mark, tell folks who don't know where you are, if you'd like. What happened to Mark's video? Mark, every time I come to you, turn off your video. Let's see. There you go. Unmute, please. There you go. Mark, welcome in.
It might be a connection issue, but I'll try to get my point across while I'm still on there. Central Texas, about an hour north of Austin, near Fort Cavazos. I'm a military veteran, so big military community here. I'm also a licensed psychotherapist. That's the field I transitioned into after active duty. And I've never been able to get on one of these despite lack of trying. And I wanted to say, looking back to the election and all the different interviews that Harris gave, I kind of wish the marriage and family therapist would have gone into this, because it would have been interesting. But when we do intakes, we do clinical assessments, we look at a lot of body language, and we look at affect, voice, you know, what people present basically.
Yeah.
And with Harris, what I saw in basically all her appearances was basically somebody who didn't really believe what they were saying. So essentially, like talking points, like a script. And I never really felt like we were getting the person, you know, the authenticity. and I'm speaking from a clinical perspective.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to give that insight to the viewers, to all the participants, because we do this every day. I work for the VA, so I work with veterans. I do this every day. And I think part of me, my opinion is that she really didn't want the position, because I think she would have pushed back on her handlers and actually posited more of what she actually thought if
Yeah.
she was
Mark,
really going to go for it.
to make the judgment you're making, are you keying off of the tone of her voice or body language?
Everything.
What's the
So in
everything?
terms of psychological assessment, when you come into me, I'm taking in everything, regardless of what you say, what you don't say, affect, expression, everything. In psychology, that's how we're trained. Whether you're a LPC, psychotherapist, marriage and family, clinical social worker, psychologist. So we all have this training. And basically with Harris, I just got that she didn't believe what she was saying. And she probably wanted to get that position, but once she kind of realized that it wasn't going to work out, I think you kind of saw it in the last few days, some of the confidence waned. And that's just the clinical opinion. Obviously, I haven't done an assessment.
Of course. Mark, what's your comparable view of Donald Trump?
With Trump, this one's interesting. You've kind of laid this out, though not from a psychological perspective. You've got someone who, because of how he was raised in what I would call mini traumas, because of his father and kind of heavy-handed approach he took with his family, ostracized one of his sons because he didn't want to go into the construction business. That's well known. I think because of how he was raised, he kind of overcompensates. And that's what you see in a lot of these different interviews and, of course, the debates. And for us on the psychology side, this is easy to see. Some people have gone as far as called him a narcissist, which I don't know if I'd go that far, because you can't have traits of a condition without actually having that condition, if that makes sense. So, I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but he has some traumas in the past based on how he was raised and things he's gone through, kind of like everyone to a degree. And so all these manifestations of overreach that you see, that's a result of that. That's the result. And that's who he is. I mean, at his age, that's who he is. So he's not going to change.
Super interesting, Mark. Thank you for coming on, sharing that. Loved hearing it. And I think it'll ring true for quite a few folks. Haley, welcome in. Thanks for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are, who you voted for president, what's on your mind, please.
Yeah, I'm from Dallas. I've kind of been all over the place. I lived in Israel, New York, Dallas now. So basically, I should have maybe waited for like the Democrats' day, but I've been kind of thinking over the last couple of days, just based on how it is with my own family, how split down the middle we really are. Half of us are basically believing everything the mainstream media says, CNN, MSNBC, those are really my parents, kind of the older generation. And then my sister is usually more definitely all in for Trump. She voted for Trump, her and her fiance is a military guy. So they voted for Trump. My question is basically like, how can the Democrats really like kind of get their stuff together if the media is so on their side with the way, like, it's not even, there's obviously, we've been talking about it for weeks here, but it's like, there's no comparable. Like, we have the alternative media, which I guess would be more Trump or like, more fair to him. But I just, like, when somebody's patting your back all the time, telling you you're perfect, you're perfect, you're perfect, like, how can they really get their stuff together? Just
it's a fantastic question, because they think they get such a benefit from it that it's hard for them to turn away from it. I think that it would require a lot of discipline to to ignore the positive reinforcement they're getting. I think you see people like Ro Khanna and others who
Right.
go on Fox News and go to Hugh Hewitt and conservative places. I think that's probably a start, is to test their message and their ideas with audiences besides the ones within the blue bubble. And then I think, as hard as it is to ignore the positive reinforcement they get, and really raise the questions for themselves of, are our ideas good? Are we really doing things to make the real lives of real people better? But it's a very complicated question that you raise, because for them, a lot of them, very few of them, I should say, are open in acknowledging or even understand how much of an advantage on one level they get. Very few people I've ever covered who are Democrats will acknowledge how unfair it is, because they point to things like, they say Trump's being normalized, or the
Right.
media is too corporatist. So they're right. They can point to 101 things that make the counter argument, but it's 101 versus 1,000,001. But very few of them are willing to admit that. So I don't know exactly how it could happen, but I do agree with the premise of your question. It would be very tough. But as I said, I think the best thing they could do is to not just play home games, but to follow those few who are willing to play away games. Haley, thank you. Great question. Okay, let's get one more in here. I'm very intrigued by Tom, or Jeff rather. Jeff, come on in and tell us your Speaker Johnson observation. Eager to hear it.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I understand the media and what we're hearing is overwhelmed by, the president's picks and his nominations and so forth at this juncture. But I think what we're gonna, and I worked for Tom DeLay, who actually, you have a little bit of a passing resemblance too, I think, but you probably, if you see that as well or not, but
I tend to prefer to be said I look like Marco Rubio, but no disrespect meant to leader DeLay.
But I heard like Dan talk about on the morning meeting and so forth, there was talk about the margin in the House. And I think that's going to be the weak link in this whole equation for Trump, is that DeLay was definitely talented. And we had relatively narrow margins, not quite as narrow as I think these are going to be. But the other thing is that Tom had this like bag of candy he walked around with, which were called earmarks. And those things have loosened up a little bit in recent years, but I mean, it's nothing like what it used to be like. And so I think, that's going to be the hardest part of this whole thing. I mean, the majority in the House is typically, it's typically whoever's in the majority in the House is, the rules are structured so that they're in very, good position. The majority strong in the House and weak in the Senate.
Yeah.
But I think the House is gonna look a lot more like the Senate in this, the coming months, because of the margin and also the scope and how aggressive, the agenda is coming out of the White House. So I think it's gonna be very hard to do the things that Trump wants to do, given the landscape. I'd be curious to see whether you agree with that or not.
Yeah. Well, I've never felt as uncertain about what's likely to happen as I am about this administration, in part for the reason you said, which is, can Mike Johnson deliver votes? And is Trump going to pass anything that doesn't just require Republican votes? Is he going to have any legislative agenda items that require Democratic votes, or seek Democratic votes, maybe don't require them? They're starting to develop a school of thought that keys off of what you said and some other factors, including a belief that some of the people Trump will put in positions are not competent, that says this will be an extremely unproductive presidency, that this term will not have any major accomplishments, that he comes in as a lame duck, comes in with narrow majorities in both chambers, comes in with leaders who are untested. If you take the sort of aggregate of Johnson and Thune, we haven't had Republican leaders this untested in quite some time, just because McConnell alone, and that Trump will overreach in areas that will be unproductive. And so I don't reject that school of thought out of hand. I mean, they have to. People say they have to do the tax bill because they can't let the provisions expire, but doesn't mean they can get the votes, right? They could produce something
Well,
that's too big to fail.
at least in that case, you do that through reconciliation. So you
You
don't
do.
need,
You don't
it's
need.
a lot
You don't
easier to
need.
do.
You don't need them. But for instance, and they may blink, but there are Republicans who say they won't pass a bill that doesn't restore the SALT deduction, right? And so it may be it fails and then maybe it passes, but it's possible you can't get a majority of the House because you can't get any Democratic votes and you lose a handful of Republicans, and then you got to regroup. So I'm not predicting that, but I'm open to that as a school of thought. And again, a big part of the building block of those who subscribe to that point of view believe that the narrow majority in the House is a part of it. You know, you've got some members of the caucus of the conference who are more moderate than Trump, and they may just decide they don't want to be part of deregulation. The other thing is, although he's got an agenda that is broad and well known: deregulation, energy production, immigration, tariffs. The specifics are not that not that clearly laid out, and so it may be in all those areas, except with the possible exception of immigration, that it's difficult to do with these narrow majorities. So I think you're onto something, but even the reconciliation may be a challenge. But no doubt, one of the big debates now is what can go into reconciliation, what their aspiration is. But we've seen reconciliation packages that are too big to fail. They eventually double back to them. But particularly if they're misjudging the mood of the Senate and they try to ram through these nominees and really develop a jaundiced relationship with the White House, they may have trouble in both chambers, again, because the narrow majority and because he's a lame duck.
Right.
So there's so many unorthodox things about this. We're over. So Jeff, thank you for the question. Great topic, and we'll definitely return to it. Thanks to Sarah. Thanks to everybody who asked questions. Again, tomorrow night, if you're in New York City, please join us downtown in the West Village for not comedy, but the morning meeting after dark. Dan, Sean, and I live show again, 5 p.m. Eastern time. We'll stream live, replaces this show. So don't look for us at 6 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Look for us for 5 in an unfamiliar location. We'll be on stage downtown at the Village Underground, part of the Comedy Cellar comedy complex in the West Village. And before that, at 9 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow, Sean, Dan, and I will be here virtually, but also live for the morning meeting. Have a great evening. We'll see you at 9 a.m.